The bitter Wyoming winter had been especially merciless that year. Snowdrifts piled against the walls of Abigail Turner's small cabin, serving as both insulation and prison. At 68, she watched through frosted windows as another storm approached. From the mountains, bringing with it an Arctic wind that found every crack in her century-old home. Abigail pulled her late husband's tattered cardigan tighter around her thin frame. The woolen sweater, like everything else in her possession, had seen better days. 10 years had passed since James's sudden heart attack left her alone on their small homestead 12 miles outside of Riverdale. The modest savings they'd accumulated had dwindled to almost nothing, stretched thin by medical bills and necessary repairs to the cabin's failing roof. Now, as December's grip tightened on the valley, Abigail faced the cruelest truth of her situation. The pantry contained little more than 2 cans of beans, half a bag of rice, and some dried herbs from her summer garden. The firewood pile had diminished to a precarious few logs. Her monthly Social Security check wouldn't arrive for another 2 weeks, and the money she made selling handmade quilts at the general store had dried up as winter roads became impassable. Survival had never seemed so uncertain. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Abigail woke to a cabin gone cold. The fire she'd nursed through the night with miserly additions of kindling had finally surrendered to the inevitable. She remained beneath the pile of quilts for several minutes, gathering the courage to face the day. Her breath hung visible in the frigid air. "Come on, old girl," she murmured to herself. "Can't stay in bed forever." The thermometer outside her window read 12 degrees below zero. A brutal but not uncommon temperature for January in this part of Wyoming. Abigail moved cautiously across the wooden floor, her joints protesting every step. Age had not been kind to her body, arthritis claiming territory in her hands and knees with the same determination that winter claimed the landscape. She dressed in layers, long underwear beneath jeans, 2 sweaters, thick socks. The routine was familiar, but increasingly inadequate against the persistent cold. After rebuilding the fire with the last of her indoor wood supply, Abigail made a breakfast of weak tea and a small portion of rice. The simple meal did little to satisfy her hunger, but she'd become adept at rationing. Each mouthful was consumed slowly, deliberately, making the experience last. Through the kitchen window, Abigail surveyed her property. The small barn stood empty now. They'd sold the last of their livestock 3 years ago when James's medical bills became overwhelming. The chicken coop housed only 2 aging hens that barely produced an egg between them each day. The vegetable garden lay dormant beneath 3 feet of snow, months away from offering any sustenance. Abigail's gaze drifted to the road leading into town. Unplowed and treacherous, it might as well have been on another continent. Her ancient pickup truck hadn't started in weeks, its battery succumbing to the cold and its age. The phone line had gone down during the last storm, leaving her more isolated than she'd been since moving to the homestead with James 45 years earlier. Despite her circumstances, Abigail maintained a routine born of decades of country living. She checked on her hens, breaking the ice in their water dish and giving them the last handful of store-bought feed mixed with some of her precious rice. She brought in armloads of wood from the rapidly diminishing pile stacked against the barn, each trip leaving her breathless and exhausted. By mid-afternoon, reality could no longer be ignored. She needed supplies, food, fuel, maybe medicine for the persistent cough she'd developed. Without them, the math of survival became simple and stark. The nearest neighbor, the Hendersons, lived 5 miles away across difficult terrain. At her age, in this weather, such a journey on foot would be foolhardy at best, fatal at worst. Abigail sat at her kitchen table, a worn notebook open before her. She'd always been practical, a woman who faced challenges head-on. James had called it her accountant's soul, her ability to assess situations without sentiment clouding her judgment. Now she tallied her resources with the same clear-eyed evaluation. Food, perhaps 3 days' worth, if stretched to the barest minimum. Firewood, 2 days, maybe 3 if she confined herself to a single room. Money, $17.38 in her purse. Options, dwindling faster than both food and firewood. She closed the notebook and moved to the window again. The afternoon light was already fading, the shortness of winter days another cruelty in a season full of them. In the distance, dark. Clouds gathered over the mountain range, promising another night of snow and wind. For the first time in years, Abigail felt the weight of fear pressing against her chest. Not the fleeting kind that comes with sudden danger, but the deeper, more insidious fear of slow, inevitable decline, of becoming one of those tragic stories people tell in hushed tones. The elderly woman found frozen in her home, too proud or too isolated to seek help. "Not today," she said aloud, her voice sounding strange in the quiet cabin. "Not without a fight." With determined movements, Abigail retrieved an old CB radio from the storage closet. It had been James's, used during his years working for the county road department. She hadn't touched it since his death, unsure if it even still functioned. But desperate times demanded desperate measures. She set the radio on the kitchen table, wiping a decade of dust from its surface with her sleeve. The power cord was frayed in places, the dial stiff from disuse. Abigail plugged it in, half expecting nothing to happen. To her surprise, a small red light flickered to life. "Hello, this is Abigail Turner out on Parker Creek Road," she said into the microphone, her voice wavering slightly. "I'm in need of assistance, food running low. If anyone can hear me, please, respond." She released the talk button, waiting. Static filled the kitchen, a white noise that seemed to emphasize the emptiness of her situation rather than alleviate it. Abigail repeated her message twice more, each time met with the same wall of static. As dusk approached, bringing with it another drop in temperature, Abigail made a difficult decision. She would conserve her remaining firewood by heating only the small bedroom. She would eat just enough to maintain her strength, and tomorrow, if the weather permitted even slightly, she would attempt the walk to the Henderson place. She was gathering blankets from the living room when a sound from the kitchen caught her attention, not the static of the radio, but a voice, faint but unmistakably human, breaking through the electronic noise. "This is Logan Mitchell over at Broken Spur Ranch," the voice said, crackling with interference but audible. "I'm reading you, Mom. What's your situation?" Abigail rushed to the radio, nearly tripping in her haste. "Hello? Can you hear me? This is Abigail Turner. I'm about 12 miles east of Riverdale, off Parker Creek Road." "I hear you, Mrs. Turner," the voice responded. "You said you're running low on supplies." "Yes," Abigail confirmed, relief making her lightheaded. "Food, firewood. I've been snowed in for nearly 3 weeks now. My truck won't start, and the phone lines are down." There was a pause, filled only with static. Abigail held her breath, afraid the tenuous connection had been lost. "I know where you are," the voice finally returned. "James Turner's widow, right? Little white cabin with blue shutters?" "Yes, that's me," Abigail said, surprised to be recognized. "Sit tight, Mrs. Turner. Weather's supposed to ease up around dawn. I'll bring you what you need." "I don't have much money," Abigail admitted, embarrassment coloring her admission. The voice chuckled, a warm sound amid the electronic static. "We don't worry about that sort of thing during Wyoming winters, Ma'am. Just keep your fire going as best you can. I'll be there tomorrow." The connection faded back to static, but Abigail remained at the table, staring at the radio as if it might produce further miracles. Logan Mitchell. The name wasn't familiar, though Broken Spur Ranch rang a distant bell, one of the larger cattle operations in the county, if she remembered correctly. That night, Abigail slept in fitful increments, waking frequently to add small amounts of wood to the bedroom stove. Outside, the promised break in the weather seemed to materialize. The howling wind that had been her constant companion for weeks finally subsided, leaving behind an eerie silence. As dawn's grey light filtered through her window, Abigail rose and dressed in her warmest clothes. She wasn't entirely convinced that the stranger from the radio would actually appear. Life had taught her that promises were easily made and easily broken, especially when keeping them required navigating miles of snow-covered terrain in sub-zero temperatures. Still, hope was a powerful motivator. She cleared a path from her front door to where the driveway should be, each shovelful of snow depleting her already limited energy reserves. By mid-morning, exhausted and chilled despite her exertion, Abigail retreated to the cabin to warm herself. By the stove, the sound came shortly after noon, the unmistakable rumble of a vehicle struggling through deep snow. Abigail moved to the window, hardly daring to believe her ears. Through the cleared glass, she watched as a large pickup truck, with oversized tires and a plow attachment on the front, made its way up her long-buried driveway, carving a path through pristine white. Logan Mitchell had kept his promise after all. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Abigail watched from her front porch as the truck came to a stop in her cleared driveway. The engine cut off and the driver's door swung open. A tall man in his early 40s emerged, bundled in a heavy sheepskin coat, worn jeans and snow boots. His face was partially obscured by a thick beard frosted with ice crystals, but his eyes were startlingly blue and alert as they met hers. "Mrs. Turner?" he called, his breath visible in the frigid air. "Yes," she replied, pulling her cardigan tighter. "Mr. Mitchell, I presume?" He nodded, moving to the truck bed and lowering the tailgate. "Logan, please. Looks like I got here just in time." Abigail noticed the truck was loaded with supplies, several boxes, bags of groceries, and a substantial pile of split firewood secured with bungee cords. "I didn't expect all this," she said, her voice catching. Logan began unloading a box. "Wyoming winters don't leave much room for half measures, ma'am. Mind if I bring these inside? Some of this food shouldn't stay out in the cold too long." Abigail stepped aside, holding the door as Logan carried the first box into her kitchen. Over the next 20 minutes, he made multiple trips between the truck and cabin, bringing in groceries, firewood, kerosene for her lamps, and even a small, portable propane heater. As he worked, Abigail took stock of her unexpected savior. Logan Mitchell moved with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to physical labor. Despite the cold, he worked efficiently, stacking firewood by her stove and organizing supplies on her kitchen counter with minimal fuss. There was something familiar about him, though she couldn't place where she might have seen him before. "That should tide you over for a couple weeks at least," Logan said, removing his gloves as he finished the last trip. He declined Abigail's offer to sit, instead remaining standing by the door, surveying the cabin with a practiced eye. "I don't know how to thank you," Abigail said, overwhelmed by the generosity, "or how to pay you back. As I mentioned on the radio." Logan waved away her concern. "Consider it community service. We take care of our own out here." "Even strangers?" Abigail asked. A smile crinkled the corners of his eyes. "You're hardly a stranger, Mrs. Turner. Your husband helped my father out of a jam back in '85. Pulled his truck out of Blackwater Creek during the spring flood. Dad never forgot it." Understanding dawned on Abigail. "You're Hank Mitchell's boy? The family with the cattle operation over near Saddleback Ridge?" "The very same," Logan confirmed. "Dad passed 5 years back, but I've been running Broken Spur ever since." Abigail's memory supplied the image of a much younger Logan, a lanky teenager helping his father deliver a cord of firewood after James had broken his leg, falling off their roof. The connection created an unexpected warmth in her chest, a reminder that in rural communities, debts of kindness were passed down through generations. "Well, please know I'm grateful," she said, gesturing to the bounty now filling her kitchen. "Once the road's clear and I can get to town." "About that," Logan interrupted, his expression turning serious. "I took a good look at your truck on my way in. Battery's dead, sure, but there's more wrong than that. Fuel lines likely frozen and split. Even if we got it started, it wouldn't be safe to drive." The news, while not unexpected, still settled heavily on Abigail's shoulders. The truck had been her last link to independence, her means of accessing town when conditions permitted. "I see," she said, trying to keep disappointment from her voice. Logan shifted his weight, seeming to arrive at a decision. "Mrs. Turner, I don't mean to overstep, but this place isn't really set up for someone to weather the rest of winter alone. The roof's got weak spots where snow's building up, insulation's failing in the north wall, and being out here without transportation or phone service, it's asking for trouble." "This has been my home for 45 years, Abigail replied, a defensive edge creeping into her tone. "I've weathered plenty of winters here." "With respect, ma'am, not alone, not at 68, and not in a winter like this one." Logan's tone was gentle but firm. "The meteorologists are saying we're looking at another 6 to 8 weeks of this before any real thaw. The county road crews are already stretched thin, just keeping main arteries open." "What exactly are you suggesting?" "Mr. Mitchell?" Abigail asked, straightening her spine despite the arthritis pain that flared with the movement. Logan removed his hat, holding it respectfully in his hands. "I've got a proposition for you. Broken Spur has a caretaker's cottage that sits empty most winters. It's small but solid. Good roof, proper insulation, phone line about a quarter-mile from the main house, close enough for help if needed, far enough for privacy." Abigail stared at him, taken aback by the unexpected offer. "You want me to abandon my home just like that?" "Not abandon," Logan clarified. "Think of it as a temporary relocation, just until spring makes this place manageable again." He paused, then added, "The cottage has sat empty since our last foreman retired. Truth be told, it could use someone's touch to make it a proper home again." Abigail moved to her window, looking out at the property that had defined her adult life. Every beam, every floorboard held memories. James building the back porch as a 10th anniversary gift. Their nieces and nephews running through the summer. Garden, quiet evenings watching the sun set behind the mountains. The idea of leaving, even temporarily, felt like a small betrayal. "And what would you expect in return for this arrangement?" she asked, practical despite her emotional attachment to her home. Logan's answer surprised her. "Actually, I could use your help. My sister Emily used to handle the ranch's books, but she moved to Denver last fall. I've been making a mess of the accounting ever since." He smiled ruefully. "Numbers aren't exactly my strong suit. I was a bookkeeper before I married." "James," Abigail said slowly, memories of her years working at Riverdale's only bank surfacing. "Though that was a long time ago, things have surely changed." "Basic arithmetic doesn't change," Logan replied. "Income, expenses, payroll for 4 ranch hands. Nothing too complicated, but it needs a steady hand and attention to detail." He gestured around the cabin. "Meanwhile, I'd have my crew secure your place. Fix that roof, insulate the weak spots, make sure everything's tight for when you return in spring." The offer hung in the air between them. Abigail felt conflicted, torn between pride and pragmatism. The supplies Logan had brought would extend her survival in the cabin, but they didn't solve the underlying problems. Her isolation, the deteriorating condition of the property, the very real dangers of a Wyoming winter for a woman her age. "I'd Need to bring some personal things, she said, not quite a yes, but edging toward it. And my hens. Logan nodded, recognizing the statement for the tentative acceptance it was. We've got room for your chickens in our hen house. As for personal items, take whatever you need for comfort. The cottage is furnished, but it could use some homey touches. When would this arrangement begin? Abigail asked. No time like the at present, Logan said, glancing out the window at the briefly clear sky. Weather report says we've got about a 6-hour window before the next system moves in. If we pack up now, we can be at Broken Spur by late afternoon. The suddenness of it made Abigail's breath catch. She had imagined days to consider, time to acclimate to the idea of leaving. But Logan's pragmatic assessment of the weather couldn't be argued with. In Wyoming, you moved when conditions permitted or risked being trapped. Just until spring, she said firmly, making it a condition rather than a question. Just until spring, Logan agreed solemnly. And only if you're comfortable. You'd have your own space, your own routine. I'm offering safety and security, Mrs. Turner, not trying to take away your independence. Something in his tone, a sincere respect that acknowledged her dignity even while recognizing her vulnerability, helped Abigail make her decision. Give me an hour to pack, she said, moving toward her bedroom with new purpose. Logan nodded, understanding the significance of her decision. I'll secure the cabin for your absence. Make sure pipes are drained so nothing freezes and bursts. As Abigail gathered clothing, photographs, and the few precious mementos that defined her life with James, she felt a curious mixture of apprehension and relief. The apprehension came naturally. She was leaving the only real home she'd known. As an adult, placing her trust in a man she barely knew beyond childhood recollections and community reputation. But the relief was undeniable. The constant vigilance required to survive in her isolated circumstances had been wearing her down, in ways she'd been reluctant to admit, even to herself. The prospect of reliable heat, human connection, and freedom from the constant arithmetic of scarcity offered a respite she desperately needed, even if her pride made it difficult to acknowledge. By early afternoon, Abigail's essential belongings had been carefully packed into Logan's truck. Her 2 elderly hens were secured in a makeshift carrier, clucking indignantly at the disruption to their routine. With Logan's help, she did a final walkthrough of the cabin, ensuring all perishables were removed, water turned off, and loose. Items secured. As Logan started the truck's engine, Abigail took one last look at the small cabin that had been her sanctuary and prison these past weeks. She wasn't abandoning it, she reminded herself. She was ensuring she'd be able to return to it when the season turned. "Ready, Mrs. Turner?" Logan asked, his voice gentle. "Abigail," she corrected him, turning away from the window. "If we're going to be neighbors for the winter, you might as well use my name." Logan nodded, a small smile visible through his beard. "Abigail it is." The truck pulled away, carving a path through the snow toward Broken Spur Ranch, and an arrangement neither of them could have anticipated just 24 hours earlier. I'll create part 3 of the story, maintaining 1,500 words while avoiding repetition to keep viewers engaged. The journey to Broken Spur Ranch took longer than the 12 miles might suggest. Logan navigated carefully through unplowed back roads, occasionally stopping to clear particularly deep drifts with the truck's plow attachment. Abigail sat quietly, watching the familiar landscape transform into territory she hadn't seen in years. "Your husband used to hunt in these woods with my father," Logan commented as they passed a stand of pine trees bent under the weight of snow. "Dad said James knew where every elk herd bedded down, had an instinct for it." Abigail smiled at the memory. "James loved those hunting trips. Always said the mountains were where a man could hear himself think." "Smart man," Logan agreed. "That philosophy still holds true." They crested a hill, and Broken Spur Ranch came into view in the valley below. Abigail's breath caught at the sight. The ranch was larger than she remembered. A sprawling main house built of timber and stone, several outbuildings, a massive barn, and fenced pastures stretching toward distant mountains. Even blanketed in snow, it emanated solidity and permanence. "It's grown since I was last here," she observed. Logan nodded. Dad expanded in the 90s when beef prices were good, added 2,000 acres and rebuilt the main house. A note of pride entered his voice. "We're running about 500 head now, one of the largest operations in the county." As they drove through the main gates, Abigail noticed the activity around the property. Ranch hands moving between buildings, smoke rising from various chimneys, the distant sound of cattle. After weeks of isolation, the signs of life were both welcome and overwhelming. "The caretaker's cottage is just beyond that stand of cottonwoods," Logan said, pointing to a small structure set apart from the main complex. "I had the boys stock the kitchen this morning and get the heat going." The cottage was modest but well maintained, a single-story building with a covered porch and pitched roof. It reminded Abigail of vacation cabins she'd seen in travel magazines, rustic but comfortable. As Logan carried her bags inside, Abigail took stock of what would be her temporary home. The interior was simple but thoughtfully arranged. A small living area with a stone fireplace and comfortable furniture, a compact kitchen with modern appliances, a bedroom with a handmade quilt on the bed, and a surprisingly spacious bathroom. Large windows offered views of the surrounding landscape, bringing light into the space despite the winter gloom. "It's lovely," Abigail said, surprised by how much she meant it. "Been empty too long," Logan replied, setting down her suitcase. "Ranch foreman used to live here until he retired last spring. We've been short-handed since, making do with the hands we have." He paused, seeming hesitant for the first time since she'd met him. "I should mention, most of the boys don't know about our arrangement yet. Far as they're concerned, you're our new bookkeeper, pure and simple." Abigail understood what wasn't being said. Logan had preserved her dignity by presenting her presence as a business arrangement rather than a charity case. "I appreciate that," she said quietly. Logan showed her around the cottage, explaining the heating system, where to find extra supplies, and how to reach the main house by phone if needed. When they'd completed the tour, he checked his watch. "Dinner's at 6 in the main house, if you'd like to join us. Nothing fancy. Cook makes enough for an army. Or I can have something sent over if you prefer to settle in first." Abigail considered the invitation. Part of her wanted to retreat, to process the whirlwind of changes alone, but another part recognized that isolation had been her enemy these past weeks. "I'll join you," she decided, "though I might need directions to find my way in the dark. I'll come by at 5:45, Logan offered. "Ranch can be confusing for newcomers, especially in snow." After he left, Abigail unpacked her belongings, arranging photographs and mementos to make the space feel more personal. She placed James's picture on the bedside table, touching the frame briefly before continuing her work. Outside, she could hear Logan talking with one of the ranch hands about settling her hens in the main coop. The domesticity of the scene, a warm house, food in the cupboards, people within calling distance, created an ache in her chest. She hadn't realized how accustomed she'd grown to solitude until its absence became noticeable. When she'd finished unpacking, Abigail sat at the small writing desk by the window and opened her notebook. The accountant in her needed to calculate what this arrangement would truly cost, not in dollars, but in independence, in self-reliance, in the identity she'd maintained since James's death. Before she could complete her tally, a knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. A young woman with auburn hair pulled into a practical braid stood on the porch, a covered basket in her hands. "Mrs. Turner, I'm Maggie Dawson, the ranch cook. Thought you might like some fresh bread and preserves to tide you over until dinner." The unexpected kindness momentarily robbed Abigail of words. She accepted the basket with a murmured thank you, inhaling the scent of freshly baked bread. "Logan mentioned you might be helping with the books," Maggie continued. "Thank goodness, he's been making a mess of payroll for months. Last check, he somehow added an extra 0 to my salary. Not that I was complaining." Her easy laugh invited Abigail to share the joke. "I'll do my best," Abigail promised, warming to the young woman's forthright manner, "though I'm a bit out of practice." "Can't be worse than what we've got now," Maggie assured her. "Anyway, I should get back. Feeding 12 hungry ranch hands is like trying to fill a bottomless pit. See you at dinner." She departed with a wave, leaving Abigail feeling slightly more anchored. The interaction, brief as it was, suggested that her presence at Broken Spur might be valued beyond Logan's sense of obligation. At 5:45, as promised, Logan appeared to escort her to the main house. The temperature had dropped considerably, and Abigail was grateful for his steadying arm as they navigated the snow-covered path. The ranch house loomed larger as they approached, its windows glowing with warm light. "Fair warning," Logan said, as they reached the porch. "The boys can be a rowdy bunch at mealtimes, but they mind their manners when there's company." Abigail smoothed her cardigan, suddenly self-conscious about her simple appearance. "I'm hardly formal company." "You're a guest," Logan corrected her, "and the first one we've had in a while. They'll be on their best behavior." Inside, the main house was a study in contrasts. Rustic architecture alongside comfortable luxury. The dining room featured a massive table that could seat 20, though only about a dozen places were set. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, its fire crackling pleasantly. As they entered, conversation momentarily halted as curious eyes assessed the newcomer. Logan made brief introductions, presenting Abigail as Mrs. Turner, our new bookkeeper. The ranch hands, mostly young men with a few veterans among them, nodded respectfully. Maggie emerged from the kitchen, carrying platters of roasted meat and vegetables, filling the room with delicious aromas. Abigail was seated at Logan's right, a position of honor that wasn't lost on her. As dishes were passed and conversation resumed, she observed the easy camaraderie among the ranch staff. Inside jokes, good-natured ribbing, and the occasional serious discussion about ranch operations. "Mrs. Turner used to work at Riverdale Bank," Logan mentioned during a lull in conversation. "She'll be sorting out our financial situation starting tomorrow." One of the older hands, a weathered man introduced as Pete, raised his water glass in a small salute. "Thank the Lord. Maybe I'll get paid the right amount for once." Laughter rippled around the table, and Abigail found herself smiling despite her nerves. These people harbored no suspicion about her sudden appearance or hidden judgment about her circumstances. To them, she was simply the new bookkeeper, a professional joining their ranks. After dinner, as ranch hands dispersed to evening chores or leisure activities, Logan walked Abigail back to the cottage. The night had cleared, stars brilliant in the black Wyoming sky. "Thank you for dinner," Abigail said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Your people are very welcoming." "Good bunch," Logan agreed. "Most have been with us for years. Pete's practically a family, been here since before I was born." At the cottage door, Logan hesitated. "I've set up the office for you to start tomorrow if you're feeling up to it. No pressure if you need more time to settle in." "I'll start tomorrow," Abigail decided. "Best to be useful." Logan nodded, seeming pleased. "I'll come by at 9 to show you the systems, such as they are." He turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and the boys brought your truck in while we were at dinner. Ray's good with engines. He'll see what can be done." The consideration of this gesture, saving her truck without being asked, touched Abigail deeply. "That's very kind." "Just neighborly," Logan replied with characteristic understatement. "Sleep well, Abigail." As he walked away through the snow, Abigail remained on the porch, watching his retreating figure. The day had been disorienting, leaving her home, accepting help from virtual strangers, stepping into a new role and environment. Yet beneath the discomfort of change lay an undeniable current of relief. For the first time in months, she wouldn't fall asleep, wondering if she'd wake to a dead fire and frozen pipes. For the first time since James died, she'd eaten at a table, surrounded by conversation and laughter, rather than silence. The arrangement still felt precarious, a temporary solution based on Logan Mitchell's sense of obligation to her late husband. But as Abigail prepared for bed in the warm cottage, she acknowledged that sometimes accepting help wasn't weakness, but wisdom. James would have understood that, practical man that he was. Just until spring, she reminded herself, touching his photograph on the nightstand. Then we'll go home. But as she drifted toward sleep, Abigail couldn't deny that the comfort of security, of warmth, food, and human connection was a powerful antidote to the winter that had nearly broken her. The morning dawned clear and cold, sunlight reflecting off the snow with diamond brilliance. Abigail woke early from the best sleep she'd had in months, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings before remembering the previous day's events. The cottage felt almost decadently warm compared to her cabin, thanks to the efficient heating system Logan had explained. After a breakfast of toast with Maggie's homemade preserves, Abigail dressed carefully in one of her better outfits, a navy skirt and cardigan she'd packed as an afterthought. If she was to be the ranch bookkeeper even temporarily, she wanted to look the part. True to his word, Logan arrived at 9, stomping snow from his boots before entering the cottage. "Sleep all right?" he asked, his cheeks ruddy from the cold. "Better than I have in weeks," Abigail admitted. "It's a comfortable place. Glad to hear it." He gestured toward the door. "Office is in the east wing of the main house. I'll show you what we're working with." The walk across the ranch compound gave Abigail a better sense of Broken Spur's layout in daylight. The property was impressively maintained, despite the challenges of winter. Pathways cleared, equipment protected, livestock tended in sheltered areas. Evidence of Logan's management style was everywhere, practical, thorough, forward-thinking. The ranch office stood in stark contrast to this efficiency. When Logan opened the door, Abigail struggled to hide her dismay. The room was spacious enough, with a handsome desk and filing cabinets, but every surface was covered with haphazard stacks of papers, invoices, receipts, and ledgers in various states of disarray. "I know," Logan said, noting her expression. "It's bad. How have you been doing payroll?" Abigail asked, approaching the desk cautiously, as if the paper piles might collapse with any sudden movement. "Mostly from memory and old figures," Logan admitted. "Emily left some systems in place, but—" He gestured helplessly at the chaos. Abigail picked up a ledger, noting entries that had been scratched out and rewritten multiple times. "When was the last time you balanced the books?" "Officially. Last April, when Emily was still here. Since then, it's been more of an estimate." The accountant in Abigail was both horrified and intrigued by the challenge. A ranch this size operated on significant cash flow, cattle sales, equipment purchases, payroll, utilities, feed costs, veterinary expenses. Running it on estimates for 8 months was a recipe for financial disaster. "I'll need some time to sort through everything," she said, already mentally categorizing the different types of documents, "and a system for organizing ongoing paperwork. Whatever you need," Logan assured her. "I've cleared my morning to help you get started, answer any questions about the operation." They spent the next 3 hours working side by side. Logan explained the ranch's revenue streams, payment schedules, and recurring expenses, while Abigail created organized piles and took detailed notes. Despite his self-professed inadequacy with numbers, Logan had a thorough understanding of the ranch's operations and a clear vision for its future. "We've been expanding the organic beef program," he explained, as Abigail reviewed cattle sale receipts. "Premium prices, specialized market. Dad would have thought it was nonsense, but the margins are better than conventional. Smart business, Abigail commented, genuinely impressed. These sales figures are excellent. By noon, they'd made significant headway. The desk was visible again, and Abigail had established preliminary systems for organizing the ranch's financial records. Logan excused himself to check on a pregnant heifer, leaving Abigail to continue sorting through the backlog. She was so absorbed in her task that she barely noticed when Maggie arrived with lunch. A hearty soup and freshly baked rolls on a tray. "Logan said you might work through lunch," Maggie explained, setting the tray on the one clear corner of the desk. "Figured you'd need sustenance to face this mess." Abigail thanked her, suddenly aware of how hungry she'd become. The simple meal was delicious, reminding her how different her circumstances were from just 24 hours earlier, when lunch would have been a meager portion of rice, carefully rationed to last another day. "How's it going in here?" Maggie asked, glancing around at the newly organized piles. "Progress," Abigail replied between spoonfuls of soup. "Though there's still plenty to do," Maggie nodded knowingly. "Emily tried to get Logan to hire a proper accountant after she left, but he's stubborn. Likes to keep things in the family, so to speak." The comment gave Abigail pause. "I'm hardly family." "No, but your husband and Hank Mitchell go way back. That counts for something in Logan's book." Maggie gathered her empty dishes. "Besides, he's been worried about you up in that cabin alone. We all heard about it when the Hendersons mentioned they hadn't seen smoke from your chimney in days." The revelation that her situation had been a topic of community concern was both warming and uncomfortable. Abigail had prided herself on independence, on not being someone others needed to worry about. "I was managing," she said, more defensively than she intended. Maggie's expression softened. "Sure you were. But out here, managing alone isn't the same as thriving together." She headed for the door, then added over her shoulder, "Logan will never admit it, but having you here, solving this financial mess, is as much a help to him as getting you through winter is for you. Makes it a fair trade, doesn't it?" The perspective shift lingered with Abigail throughout the afternoon as she continued organizing the ranch's financial records. Perhaps this arrangement wasn't charity after all, but a genuine exchange of needs. Her financial expertise for their shelter and security. The thought eased something tight in her chest, a pride that had made accepting help so difficult. By late afternoon, Abigail had created order from chaos, neat stacks of organized documents, a preliminary balance sheet showing the ranch's financial position, and a list of questions for Logan about various expenses and income sources. The work had energized rather than exhausted her, engaging mental muscles that had grown stiff from disuse. When Logan returned to check on her progress, his surprise was evident. "This is incredible," he said, surveying the transformed office. "You did all this in one day?" "Just basic organization," Abigail demurred, though she felt a flush of satisfaction at his approval. "The real work begins tomorrow when I start reconciling accounts." Logan studied the preliminary balance sheet she'd created. "Are these figures accurate? Because if they are, we're in better shape than I thought." "Preliminary," Abigail cautioned. "But yes, from what I can see, Broken Spur is financially sound. Your organic program has offset the early winter feed costs." "Quite effectively." Relief washed over Logan's features. That's good news, real good news." For the first time, Abigail glimpsed the weight he carried. Responsibility for the ranch, the livelihood of his employees, the legacy his father had entrusted to him. Managing it all with inadequate financial visibility must have been deeply stressful. "I'll have more detailed reports for you by the end of the week," she promised. "Once I've gotten everything properly entered and balanced." Logan nodded, seemingly at a loss for words. Finally, he cleared his throat. I sent Ray and Pete over to your cabin today. They're patching that roof and reinforcing the north wall like we discussed." The mention of her home sent a pang through Abigail. Despite the comfort of the cottage and the satisfaction of useful work, she still felt the tug of attachment to her own place. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I appreciate that." "Least we can do," Logan replied. He hesitated, then added, "One of the boys found something while they were securing the place. A box in the root cellar under some old blankets. Thought it might be important, so they brought it back." He retrieved a dusty wooden box from the shelf by the door, one Abigail recognized immediately. Her breath caught. "James's letters," she whispered. Logan set the box on the desk carefully. Figured it might be personal, didn't want to leave it unattended out there. Abigail ran her fingers over the carved lid. The box contained every letter James had written to her during their courtship and his brief military service, precious memories she'd stored in the root cellar during the worst of her grief, unable to bear their presence in the cabin, but unwilling to part with them entirely. "Thank you," she said again, her voice unsteady. "This means a great deal to me." Logan nodded, understanding without need for further explanation. "Dinner's at 6 if you're feeling up to it. No obligation if you'd prefer some time alone with your memories." After he left, Abigail sat with the box on her lap, debating whether to open it. So much had changed in the past 24 hours, her location, her purpose, her immediate worries. Perhaps it was time to reclaim these memories as well, to reconnect with the love that had shaped her life rather than hiding from the pain of its loss. By the time Abigail walked to the main house for dinner, she had read 3 of James's letters. Young, man's words full of hope, dreams and ardent affection for the woman who would become his wife. The experience left her feeling raw, but strangely peaceful, as if long-sealed chambers of her heart had finally been reopened to fresh air. Dinner was a livelier affair than the previous evening, the ranch hands having grown accustomed to her presence. They included her in conversations, asked respectful questions about her bookkeeping progress, and shared amusing stories of ranch mishaps. Abigail found herself laughing genuinely for the first time in months. Later, as Logan walked her back to the cottage, he commented on the change. "Good to hear you laugh. Suits you." "It's been a while," Abigail admitted. "Sometimes I forget how." "Happens to the best of us," Logan said. "Life has a way of making us serious when we need lightheartedness most." At the cottage door, he handed her a small radio. "Weather service and emergency frequencies are marked, just in case you need anything during the night." The thoughtfulness of the gesture, providing connection without intrusion, struck Abigail as emblematic of Logan's approach to helping her. Always practical, never presumptuous. "I'm beginning to think this arrangement might work out for both of us," she said, accepting the radio. Logan's smile was visible even in the dim porch light. "That was the idea all along, Abigail. That was the idea all along." 2 weeks passed in a rhythm that became increasingly comfortable. Each morning, Abigail walked from the cottage to the ranch office, where she continued untangling Broken Spur's finances. The work was satisfying, bringing order to chaos, creating systems that would serve the ranch long after her temporary stay ended. By the end of her second week, she had fully reconciled the books, implemented proper record-keeping procedures, and prepared comprehensive financial reports for Logan's review. The ranch operated with the precision of a well-oiled machine despite the harsh winter conditions. Abigail observed how Logan balanced firmness with fairness in managing his crew, earning their respect without demanding it. The hands, in turn, worked diligently through frigid days, caring for livestock and maintaining essential operations. Without complaint, February arrived with a brief thaw that turned ranch paths to treacherous mud before freezing again into rutted ice. Abigail had grown confident navigating between the cottage and main house, learning which routes offered the surest footing. She'd even begun joining Maggie in the kitchen on occasion, rediscovering the pleasure of cooking for others after years of preparing simple meals for one. One evening, after the ranch hands had retired to the bunkhouse, Abigail lingered at the dining table with Logan and Maggie, enjoying the rare luxury of unhurried conversation. "Financial reports are ready for the quarterly tax filing," she informed Logan, sipping the herbal tea Maggie had prepared. "Everything's in order now." "Thanks to you," Logan acknowledged. "The accountant in Riverdale couldn't make sense of our books for months. You managed it in 2 weeks." "Having organized records makes all the difference," Abigail replied modestly. Once the basic structure was in place, the rest was straightforward. Maggie gathered empty dessert plates, shaking her head. "You're too humble, Abigail. Logan's been sleeping better since you sorted out that organic certification paperwork. Found him napping in his chair yesterday. First time I've seen that since Hank passed." Logan looked slightly embarrassed by this revelation. "The certification process was overwhelming. All those regulations, documentation requirements." "It's just detail work," Abigail said. "Nothing complicated once you understand the system." "Still," Logan insisted, "you've done more than just balance the books. You've given me back hours in the day." A comfortable silence settled between them, broken only by the crackling of the fireplace and Maggie's movements in the adjacent kitchen. Outside, wind whistled around the eaves of the ranch house, a reminder of the harsh Wyoming winter that continued to hold the landscape in its grip. "Any word from Ray about my truck?" Abigail asked, changing the subject. Logan's expression shifted subtly. "He's still sourcing parts. Old models can be challenging." Something in his tone caught Abigail's attention, a slight hesitation that seemed uncharacteristic of his usual straightforward manner. Before she could inquire further, Maggie returned with coffee for Logan. "Mail came in today," she announced. "Pete brought it back from town. There's a letter for you, Abigail." This was unexpected. Few people knew of Abigail's temporary residence at Broken Spur. Maggie handed her an envelope bearing the Riverdale County Assessor's stamp. "Probably about property taxes," Abigail murmured, opening it carefully. The letter was brief but consequential. Due to changes in county regulations, her property had been reassessed. The new valuation had increased substantially due to recent development in the area, resulting in property taxes nearly double what she'd paid the previous year. "Bad news?" Logan asked, noting her expression. Abigail refolded the letter slowly. "Property tax increase, quite significant. Those new vacation developments up near Parker Creek," Logan said knowingly. "They're driving up valuations all across the northeast county." Abigail's mind raced through calculations, her fixed income, existing expenses, the cost of necessary repairs to the cabin. The math was unforgiving. Even with the most stringent budgeting, the increased tax burden would be difficult to bear. "I'll figure something out," she said, tucking the letter into her cardigan pocket. "Perhaps there's an exemption for seniors or long-term residents." Logan and Maggie exchanged a glance that Abigail couldn't quite interpret. Before the conversation could continue, the ranch phone rang. Logan answered it, his expression growing serious as he listened. "I need to take this," he said, covering the receiver. "It's the vet about that difficult carving we've been monitoring." After he left the room, Maggie sat beside Abigail with uncharacteristic formality. "He won't tell you himself, so I guess it falls to me." "Tell me what?" Abigail asked, suddenly alert. Maggie sighed. "About your truck. Ray finished looking at it last week. The news isn't good. Cracked engine block, frozen and split fuel lines, transmission issues. Fixing it would cost more than the vehicle's worth." Abigail absorbed this information with growing unease. "Why wouldn't Logan tell me this?" "Because he knows what it means," Maggie replied gently. "Without transportation, living alone at your cabin becomes even more precarious. Add these tax increases." She left the implication hanging. A cold realization settled in Abigail's stomach. Her independent life at the cabin, the future she'd been planning to return to come spring, was becoming increasingly untenable. Without reliable transportation, and with increased financial pressure, her isolation would be not just difficult, but potentially dangerous. I see, she said quietly. There's more, Maggie continued, her voice dropping to ensure privacy despite the empty dining room. Logan's been paying your property taxes for the past 2 years. Abigail stared at her, certain she'd misheard. That's impossible. I've received the notices and sent the payments myself. Maggie shook her head. You've been receiving the notices. Yes, but Logan arranged with the county office to accept supplemental payments that covered the difference between what you could afford and the actual amount due. He didn't want you to lose your home to a tax lien. The revelation struck Abigail like a physical blow. Her carefully maintained illusion of self-sufficiency crumbled in an instant. For 2 years, she'd been unknowingly accepting financial assistance from Logan Mitchell, a man she'd barely known until recently. Why would he do that, she whispered, though part of her already knew the answer. Because that's who Logan is, Maggie replied simply. His father made a promise to your husband years ago, and Logan honors those commitments. The Mitchells look after their own. Abigail's mind flashed to conversations with county officials who had seemed strangely accommodating about payment arrangements, to the clerical errors that had reduced her tax statements to manageable amounts. What she'd attributed to small-town inefficiency had actually been deliberate intervention. Does everyone know about this? She asked, mortification coloring her voice. No, Maggie assured her. Just Logan, the county treasurer, and now you and me. The Hands think you're here purely as our bookkeeper, and they're grateful for your work. You've more than earned your keep, Abigail. Before Abigail could process this further, Logan returned to the dining room, his expression troubled by the veterinary conversation, but unaware of the revelation that had occurred in his absence. Everything all right? He asked, noting the tension between the women. I was just telling Abigail about the book club in town. Maggie improvised smoothly. Thought she might enjoy joining when the road's clear. Logan nodded, accepting this explanation. Good idea. Abigail's nearly worked through our entire ranch library already. The remainder of the evening passed in stilted conversation, with Abigail maintaining a composed exterior while her thoughts churned. When Logan offered to walk her back to the cottage as usual, she accepted mechanically, grateful for the darkness that hid her expression. The night air was bitterly cold, their breath forming clouds in the moonlight. They walked in silence until, reaching the cottage porch, where Abigail finally found her voice. Why didn't you tell me about my truck? She asked directly. Or about the property taxes? Logan went still, his shoulders tensing beneath his heavy coat. After a long moment he sighed, his breath a white plume in the frigid air. Maggie told you? Yes. Logan removed his hat, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of discomfort. I was going to tell you about the truck once we had explored. All the repair options. As for the taxes... He hesitated. That wasn't something you needed to know. I believe I had a right to know someone was paying my bills, Abigail countered, hurt and pride sharpening her tone. Would knowing have changed anything? Logan asked quietly, except perhaps to burden you with a debt you couldn't repay and shouldn't have to? The question silenced her momentarily. Would she have accepted such help if offered directly? The answer was painfully clear. Her pride would have prevented it, even at the cost of losing her home. I don't understand why you would do this, she said finally. We barely knew each other. Logan looked out across the moonlit ranch, his profile strong against the night sky. Your husband saved my father's life once. Did you know that? During that flash flood in '85. The truck wasn't the only thing he pulled out of Blackwater Creek. Abigail hadn't known this. James had never mentioned heroics, only helping a neighbor in trouble. Dad made a promise that day. Logan continued. That the Mitchells would always be there for the Turners if needed. When he learned about your circumstances after James died, he started checking in, making sure you had what you needed without making a fuss about it. And after Hank passed, you continued this supervision. Abigail's tone conveyed her conflicted feelings about being watched over without her knowledge. Logan turned to face her directly. I honored my father's promise, yes, but not out of obligation alone. This community takes care of its own, Abigail. It's how we all survive out here. The simple truth of his statement was difficult to argue with. Wyoming winters were unforgiving. Rural isolation, a potential death sentence for the vulnerable. What she'd interpreted as invasive charity was, in Logan's worldview, simply the natural order of things. Neighbors ensuring each other's survival. I've always paid my own way, Abigail said, her voice smaller than intended. Since James died, that's been important to me. I know, Logan acknowledged. That's why I kept the arrangement private. Your dignity mattered more than my recognition. He paused, then added, For what it's worth, these past weeks you've more than repaid any previous assistance. The work you've done with our finances has saved the ranch thousands in potential errors and penalties. The validation helped, though. It didn't entirely soothe Abigail's wounded pride. She'd built her widowhood identity around self-reliance, only to discover it had been partially illusory all along. I need some time to process this, she said finally. Logan nodded, understanding without offense. Take all the time you need. Nothing's changed about our arrangement. You're still our bookkeeper until spring, and the cottage is yours for as long as you want it. As he turned to leave, Abigail called after him, one final question pressing on her mind. The property taxes that just doubled. Were you planning to cover those too without telling me? Logan paused, but didn't turn around. We take care of our own, Abigail. Always have. He continued down the path, his figure gradually disappearing into the darkness, leaving Abigail alone with revelations that challenged everything she thought she knew about her life since James's death. The independence she'd prized, the self-sufficiency she'd built her identity around, both had been partially maintained by invisible support she'd never suspected. Inside the cottage, Abigail sat by the window, watching snowflakes begin to fall in the moonlight. The property tax letter lay before her, its implications extending far beyond financial concerns. Her future, the return to her cabin she'd been planning for when spring arrived, suddenly seemed not just challenging but potentially impossible. For the first time since arriving at Broken Spur, Abigail allowed herself to cry. Not from sadness exactly, but from the complicated relief of finally understanding why she'd never quite drowned, despite feeling constantly underwater. Someone had been quietly, respectfully ensuring she kept her head above the surface all along. I'll create part 6 of the story, keeping it between 1,000 to 500 words, while avoiding repetition to maintain viewer engagement. For 3 days following Maggie's revelation, Abigail maintained a polite distance from Logan. She continued her work in the ranch office with professional efficiency, but declined dinner invitations and kept conversations strictly business-related. The cottage became her sanctuary, a place to sort through her complicated feelings about the assistance she'd unknowingly received for years. On the 4th morning, a major snowstorm descended on Broken Spur. The blizzard conditions were severe, enough that Logan issued a ranch-wide directive to remain indoors, except for essential livestock care. From her cottage window, Abigail could barely make out the outline of the main house through the swirling white. The storm brought an unexpected gift, uninterrupted time to think, to process, to decide how she would proceed with her newly discovered knowledge. By afternoon, cabin fever drove her to the small desk where she had placed James's letters. She selected one she hadn't read yet, dated from the early years of their marriage. The yellowed paper crackled as she unfolded it, revealing James's familiar handwriting. My dearest Abby, I write this from the hospital waiting room while you sleep. The doctor says your appendix surgery went well, but these have been the longest hours of my life. When they wheeled you away, I realized with sudden clarity how thoroughly you've become part of me, how impossible it would be to navigate this world without you beside me. Something happened today that I need to tell you about. Hank Mitchell came by with food and offered to look after the livestock until you're recovered. At first, I refused. You know my stubborn pride. But then he said something that made me reconsider. The strength of this community isn't measured by how well we stand alone, but by how willingly we lean on each other when needed. He was right, Abby. I've been thinking about my father, how his refusal to accept help during the drought of '49 cost him everything. I don't want to repeat his mistakes, so I accepted Hank's offer, and it feels like the right decision, not weakness, but wisdom. The nurse says, I can see you soon. I'll end this letter here, though you'll likely find it silly that I wrote to you at all when I could simply tell you these things. But some thoughts seem to require pen and paper to be properly expressed. All my love. James. Abigail pressed the letter to her chest, tears welling in her eyes. The parallels were unmistakable. Her own stubborn pride, the Mitchell family's steadfast support, the wisdom of accepting help when truly needed. James had understood this lesson decades ago, one she had somehow forgotten in her determination to maintain independence after his death. A sharp knock at the door startled her from her reflection. She wiped her eyes hurriedly and went to answer, finding Logan on her doorstep, snow-covered and grim-faced. "We've got trouble," he said without preamble. One of the pregnant heifers broke through the fence up at the north pasture. Pete found her, but she's stuck in a snowdrift and the calf's coming early. Need all hands. Despite their recent tension, Logan's urgent tone left no room for hesitation. "What can I do?" Abigail asked, already reaching for her coat. "Maggie's setting up the barn for emergency calving. Could use your help preparing supplies." He handed her a radio. "Channel 3 if you need anything. I'll be with the rescue team." As Logan strode back toward the main barn, Abigail followed, bracing against the biting wind. The blizzard had intensified, visibility reduced to mere feet. She wondered how the rescue team would even locate the stranded animal in these conditions. In the barn, Maggie was transforming an empty stall into a makeshift delivery room, clean straw, heating lamps, veterinary supplies. She looked relieved. When Abigail appeared, "Thank goodness, I need extra hands. The vet's trapped by the storm in Riverdale. Logan and the boys will have to deliver this calf themselves if they can get the mother back." Abigail removed her coat and got to work, following Maggie's instructions to sterilize equipment and prepare warm water. The practical tasks were a welcome distraction from her emotional turmoil, focusing her mind on immediate needs rather than lingering uncertainties. Through the barn radio, they listened to the rescue attempt unfold, Logan directing his men through. The blinding snow, Pete reporting the heifer's deteriorating condition, Ray confirming the trailer was in position if they could free the animal from the drift. "She's too exhausted to walk," Logan's voice crackled through the static. "We'll have to carry her to the trailer." Maggie shook her head. "A full-grown heifer in labor? They'll never manage it." But 20 minutes later, the barn doors burst open, snow swirling in with the rescue team. 4 men carried the distressed animal on a tarp stretched between them, their faces red with exertion and cold. Logan directed them to the prepared stall, where they gently lowered the heifer onto the fresh straw. "She's fully dilated," he reported, removing his gloves to examine the animal. "Calf's coming now, but it's positioned wrong. Front legs aren't presenting properly." What followed was an intense hour of crisis management. Logan, with Pete's assistance, worked to reposition the calf, while the exhausted mother cow lowed in distress. Abigail found herself holding the heifer's head, murmuring soothingly, while providing Logan with clean towels and instruments as needed. The moment of breakthrough came suddenly, a gush of fluid followed by the appearance of tiny hooves. Logan, arms deep inside the laboring animal, gave precise instructions that everyone followed without question. His calm authority created order amid the crisis, each ranch hand performing their role with focused efficiency. When the newborn calf finally emerged, slick and seemingly lifeless, Logan immediately cleared its airways and vigorously rubbed its chest. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then the calf gave a shuddering breath and blinked, drawing a collective sigh of relief from everyone present. "He's a fighter," Logan said, genuine joy breaking through his exhaustion as he helped the wobbly calf find its mother for its first meal. As the emergency subsided and ranch hands dispersed to warm up and change out of wet clothes, Abigail remained in the barn, helping Maggie clean equipment. The shared crisis had shifted something inside her, perspective perhaps, or priority. The artificial distance she'd maintained from Logan suddenly seemed petty compared to the life and death situation they'd just navigated together. When Logan returned to check on the mother and calf, Abigail was alone in the barn, finishing the last of the cleanup. He looked exhausted but satisfied, his clothes still damp from the rescue effort. "They're doing well," he reported, nodding toward the stall where mother and calf rested. "Touch and go for a while there, but they pulled through." "Thanks to you," Abigail acknowledged. "What you did was remarkable." Logan shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "Just ranch work. Everyone played their part." "Including me?" Abigail asked, the question carrying more weight than its simple words suggested. Logan met her gaze directly. "Especially you. Not everyone could stay calm in that situation. You did what needed doing without hesitation or complaint." He paused, then added, "That's what community is, Abigail. Different strengths coming together when needed." The echo of Hank Mitchell's words from James's letter was too striking to ignore. Abigail took a deep breath, finding courage in the parallel. "I've been unfair to you," she admitted, "these past days since learning about the taxes." "You had every right to be upset," Logan countered. "I made decisions affecting your life without your knowledge or consent." "With good intentions," Abigail acknowledged. "The same intentions that sent you out in a blizzard today to save a struggling animal." Logan leaned against the barn wall, fatigue evident in his posture. "My father always said intentions mean less than actions. I should have been honest with you from the start." "And I should have been honest with myself," Abigail replied, "about my limitations, about what it really means to be independent." She carefully folded the cleaning cloth she'd been using, gathering her thoughts. "I found a letter from James today. He wrote about accepting help from your father many years ago, about the difference between pride and wisdom." "Sounds like James," Logan said with a small smile. "Dad always said he was the smartest man in the county once he got past his stubbornness." "A quality I apparently inherited," Abigail said ruefully. Their conversation was interrupted by the barn door opening, admitting a blast of cold air, and Pete, who came to check on the new mother and calf. He reported that the storm was intensifying, with predictions of another foot of snow before morning. After he left, Logan straightened from the wall with visible effort. "I should check the generator backups. Storm like this could take out power lines." As he turned to leave, Abigail spoke. "Logan, about the property taxes and everything else, I need to know the whole truth. No more protected half-stories." He paused, considering her request. "All right, but not here, not now. After dinner, once things settle down, I'll tell you everything." The promise hung between them as they parted ways. Logan to secure the ranch against the worsening storm, Abigail to return to her cottage and prepare for revelations that might fundamentally alter her understanding of the past decade. By evening, the blizzard had escalated to whiteout conditions. Dinner in the main house was a subdued affair, the ranch hands exhausted from the day's emergency and the ongoing efforts to keep livestock safe. Abigail ate quickly, aware of Logan's occasional glance in her direction, both of them cognizant of the conversation that awaited. When the meal concluded, Logan led her to his father's old study, a room she hadn't entered before. Unlike the rest of the ranch house with its practical communal spaces, this room felt intensely personal. Bookshelves lined the walls, photographs documented decades of ranch history, and Hank Mitchell's presence seemed to linger in the worn leather chair behind the desk. Logan gestured for Abigail to sit in one of the comfortable chairs by the fireplace, then poured 2 small glasses of amber liquid from a crystal decanter. Dad's favorite bourbon, he explained, handing her one, seemed appropriate for this conversation. As the storm raged outside, Logan Mitchell finally shared the complete story of his family's connection to Abigail Turner, beginning not with her husband's death as she had assumed, but decades earlier with a promise between 2 young men that would shape both their families for generations to come. The study was warm and intimate, insulated from the howling blizzard outside. Logan settled into his father's chair, the bourbon casting amber reflections in his glass as he contemplated where to begin. "My father and James were closer than most people in town realized," he started. "Their friendship began during the Blackwater Creek flood, but it went much deeper than one rescue." Logan rose and retrieved a leather-bound photo album from a shelf. He opened it to reveal 2 young men in their 20s, arms slung around each other's shoulders, standing before a half-constructed barn. "This was taken in 1963. Your husband helped my father build Broken Spur's first real barn after a tornado, destroyed the original structure. Dad had just inherited the ranch from his father, struggling to establish himself, short on cash, but long on ambition." Abigail studied the photograph, struck by James's youthful face. His eyes held the same determined gleam she'd known throughout their marriage. "James never mentioned helping build your barn," she said softly. "That was his way, wasn't it? Doing what needed doing without fanfare." Logan turned the page, revealing more snapshots of the 2 men throughout the years. Fishing trips, cattle, auctions, community events. They had a partnership of sorts. James was mechanically gifted, could fix anything with an engine. Dad had a knack for breeding superior livestock. They traded skills, supported each other through hard times. Logan paused, swirling the bourbon in his glass. "The summer of 1972 nearly broke this ranch. Worst drought in 30 years. Cattle dying, wells running dry. Dad was on the verge of selling everything when James offered him a loan, his entire savings at the time." "James never told me," Abigail whispered, stunned by this revelation, "because my father insisted it remain between them. His pride, you understand. But that loan saved Broken Spur." Logan's expression grew solemn. "Dad repaid it, every penny, but he never forgot. When James got sick in the early 90s, Dad was there, running your place while James recovered, bringing meals, whatever was needed." Logan closed the album gently. They had a pact, those 2. They called it the rancher's promise. If something happened to either of them, the other would look after the remaining family. Not charity, mutual protection against the hardships of this life. Abigail took a sip of bourbon, its warmth spreading through her chest as she processed this new understanding of her husband's history. "So when James died," Dad stepped in just as promised, quietly, respectfully. "He knew you were fiercely independent. James had told him as much. So he found ways to help without undermining your dignity." The mysterious firewood deliveries, Abigail murmured, pieces falling into place. "The repaired fence I thought James had fixed before he died. The adjusted property tax assessments." Logan nodded. "Simple things at first, but after Dad's health began failing, he worried about fulfilling his promise. That's when he brought me fully into the arrangement. And you continued it after he passed," Abigail concluded. "I did." Logan met her gaze directly. "Not just out of obligation to my father, though that would have been reason enough. I did it because I'd seen firsthand what their friendship meant, how it represented the best of what this harsh country produces in people: resilience, loyalty, care disguised as practicality. Outside, the wind howled with renewed fury, rattling the study windows. The storm's intensity seemed fitting backdrop to revelations that had weathered decades of Wyoming winters. When I learned you were snowed in without adequate supplies this winter, it wasn't a random CB call that brought me to your cabin, Logan admitted. I'd been monitoring your situation through the Hendersons. When they mentioned not seeing smoke from your chimney for days, I knew it was time for more direct intervention. So the CB conversation was staged? Abigail asked, surprised by this detail. No, that was real enough. I just didn't mention I was already on my way. A rueful smile crossed Logan's face. I expected resistance. You've turned down every direct offer of help since James passed. Abigail couldn't deny this truth. Pride, she acknowledged, though I called it independence. A fine line between them, Logan observed, one my father and James understood well. They sat in contemplative silence for a moment, the crackling fire and distant howl of wind the only sounds in the study. Abigail found herself reframing the past decade of her life through this new lens, not as a widow stubbornly maintaining independence against all odds, but as someone unknowingly upheld by an invisible network of care, a promise kept across generations. I don't know whether to feel grateful or foolish, she finally said. All this time thinking I was managing alone. You were managing, Logan insisted. The help was minimal, just enough to prevent disaster. Everything else, maintaining your home, your daily survival, your dignity, that was all you, Abigail. His words offered a perspective that allowed her to preserve some pride while acknowledging the assistance she'd received. It was a generous framing typical of the Mitchell approach she was beginning to understand. And now, she asked, with the truck beyond repair and property taxes doubling? Logan set down his glass, leaning forward with elbows on his knees. That's entirely your decision. The caretaker's cottage is yours for as long as you want it, permanently if you choose. Your bookkeeping skills are genuinely valuable to this ranch. That's not charity, but fair exchange. He hesitated, then continued. Alternatively, we could help you sell your property to one of those developers. Land values are high right now. The proceeds would secure your financial future, allow you to live wherever you wished. Sell the cabin. The suggestion sent a pang through Abigail's heart, despite its practical merit. It's one option, Logan said carefully. There are others. You could keep the property, but stay here during winters for safety. Or we could help modernize your cabin. Better insulation, updated heating system, reliable generator. The range of possibilities was both liberating and overwhelming. For so long, Abigail had seen only one path forward, maintaining her independent life exactly as it had been during James's time. The idea that she had choices, resources, and support opened new horizons she hadn't allowed herself to consider. I need time to think, she said. Of course. Logan rose, returning the photo album to its shelf. Nothing needs deciding tonight, or tomorrow, or next month for that matter. Winter's far from over. As if to emphasize his point, a particularly violent gust of wind shook the house, momentarily drowning out the crackling fire. You should stay here tonight, Logan suggested. Maggie's already prepared the guest room. That path to the cottage will be treacherous in this storm. Abigail nodded, practical concerns overriding her usual preference for her own space. As Logan escorted her to the guest room, she felt a weight lifting. Not just the immediate worry about navigating back to the cottage through a blizzard, but the heavier burden of maintaining a facade of complete self-reliance. The guest room was warm and inviting, with a handmade quilt on the bed and a small fire already burning in the fireplace. Maggie had thoughtfully placed a nightgown and robe on the bed, along with a carafe of water and a small plate of her famous cookies. Breakfast is usually at 6, Logan said from the doorway, But given the storm, folks will likely straggle in whenever they manage to dig out. No rush. As he turned to leave, Abigail called after him. "Logan, thank you, not just for tonight, but for honoring your father's promise all these years, for respecting my dignity even when I couldn't see past my pride." He nodded, a simple acknowledgement that needed no further words. After he departed, Abigail stood by the window, watching snow swirl in the yellow light from the ranch house. The storm that had initially seemed threatening now felt oddly protective, a natural boundary between her past isolation and this new understanding. Before sleep claimed her, Abigail found herself thinking not of what she had lost, the illusion of complete independence, but of what she had gained, a deeper connection to James's life, an extended community that had been quietly supporting her all along, and most importantly, the freedom to choose her path forward without the constant pressure of imminent crisis. For the first time since arriving at Broken Spur, Abigail slept, without dreams of her cabin, without the reflexive determination to return to her solitary existence once spring came. Instead, she rested deeply in the knowledge that wherever she ultimately decided to live, she was no longer truly alone. Morning brought brilliant sunshine reflecting off pristine snow. The storm had left nearly 2 feet of fresh powder across, the ranch transforming Broken Spur into a glittering wonderland. From the kitchen window, Abigail watched ranch hands begin the process of digging out essential pathways and checking on livestock. Maggie stood beside her, offering a steaming mug of coffee. "Some storm, wasn't it? Radio says it was the biggest February blizzard in 15 years. It was certainly well-timed," Abigail remarked, accepting the coffee gratefully. "How so?" "It gave me no choice but to stay put and listen," Abigail replied. "Sometimes we need nature's intervention to overcome our own stubbornness." Maggie smiled knowingly. "Logan told you everything then?" "Enough to understand I've been seeing only half the picture all these years." Abigail took a sip of coffee, savoring its warmth. "Though I suspect there's still more to learn." "Always is," Maggie agreed. "That's the beauty of community, layers of connection you discover just when you need them most." Through the window, Abigail spotted Logan leading a team toward the north pasture to check on the cattle. His calm authority was evident even from a distance, a man who carried responsibility not as a burden, but as his natural role in the order of things. "He's a good man," Abigail observed quietly. "One of the best," Maggie confirmed. "Cut from the same cloth as his father. And yours, it sounds like." The comparison between Logan and James felt right somehow. Different men from different generations, but sharing core values that had become increasingly rare: reliability, quiet integrity, care expressed through action rather than words. As Abigail helped prepare breakfast for the ranch hands, she found herself contemplating not just her past or immediate future, but possibilities she hadn't considered in years. Not simply surviving winter, but potentially thriving in a life reconnected to community, to purpose, to the legacy of mutual support that James and Hank Mitchell had established decades ago. The revelation of that legacy didn't diminish her years of independence. It contextualized them within a larger story of interconnection and reciprocity, a story she was only now beginning to fully understand. March arrived, with gradual warming, melting snowdrifts revealing patches of earth dormant beneath winter's blanket. 6 weeks had passed since the blizzard night when Logan shared the history of the rancher's promise. 6 weeks that transformed Abigail's understanding of her place in the community and her possible futures. Her work at Broken Spur had expanded beyond basic bookkeeping. With the ranch's finances now properly organized, she had turned her attention to modernizing their systems, implementing digital record-keeping that integrated with their organic certification requirements, streamlining payroll processes, and creating forecasting models that helped Logan make more informed breeding and purchasing decisions. The cottage had become truly hers in small but meaningful ways. James's photographs on the mantel, her quilts adding color to the furniture, even her elderly hens settled comfortably in the ranch's coop, producing the occasional egg that Maggie insisted was superior to store-bought for baking. On a particularly mild afternoon, Abigail sat on the cottage porch, enjoying sunshine warm enough to work outside with just a light sweater. She was reviewing applications for the summer internship program she'd suggested to Logan, an opportunity for agricultural business students to gain hands-on experience while providing the ranch with additional help during their busiest season. The sound of an approaching vehicle drew her attention. Logan's truck appeared around the bend in the driveway, returning from what was supposed to be a routine supply run to Riverdale. Something about the way he parked, quickly at an angle, suggested urgency. He emerged from the truck carrying a large envelope and walked briskly toward her porch. "I stopped by the county office while I was in town," he said, without preamble. "Thought you should see this right away." Abigail accepted the envelope with curiosity that turned to shock as she examined its contents, photographs of her cabin, or rather, what remained of it. The roof had partially collapsed under the weight of accumulated snow, walls buckling inward. The structure that had been her home for 45 years now resembled a broken shell. Pete and Ray discovered it yesterday during their check of the property, Logan explained, sitting beside her. "I didn't want to upset you until we had a full assessment. The county inspector took these photos this morning." Abigail studied the images, surprised by her own reaction. There was sadness, certainly, at seeing the physical embodiment of her life with James damaged so severely. But the devastation she might have expected, the sense of irreplaceable loss, was notably absent. "The inspector says it's beyond reasonable repair," Logan continued gently. "Foundations compromised from water damage, supporting beams cracked. They're recommending complete demolition for safety." Abigail nodded slowly, placing the photographs back in the envelope. "I suppose that simplifies my decision about returning." "I'm sorry, Abigail," Logan said, genuine regret in his voice. "I know how much that place meant to you." "It did," she agreed, gazing out at the ranch spread before them. "But I'm finding that meaning can transfer, that memories aren't actually bound to specific walls or floors." She turned to look at him directly. "James didn't leave me a cabin. He left me a legacy of connection, one I nearly forgot in my determination to go it alone." Logan seemed both surprised and relieved by her philosophical response. "Still, it's a loss, one you're entitled to grieve." "Oh, I expect I will," Abigail acknowledged. "But perhaps this is nature's way of pushing me forward when I might have clung to the past out of habit rather than need." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, watching as ranch hands moved between buildings preparing for the spring. Calving season soon to begin in earnest. Life at Broken Spur continued its rhythmic flow, animals needing tending, land requiring stewardship, people interconnected in purpose. "I've been meaning to discuss something with you," Logan said eventually. "A proposition now that circumstances have changed." "Another one." Abigail raised an eyebrow, remembering his first proposition that snowy day at her cabin. His smile acknowledged the reference. "This one's different. The ranch has been transforming under your financial guidance. The organic program expansion, the improved record-keeping, the projections that helped us secure that new grazing lease. You've created systems that work." "Thank you," Abigail said, genuinely pleased by the recognition. "It's been satisfying work." "Work that doesn't need to end with winter," Logan continued. "The position of financial manager at Broken Spur, it's yours permanently if you want it. Fair salary benefits, continued use of the cottage as part of your compensation. The ranch needs your skills, Abigail. not just for occasional bookkeeping, but as part of our long-term operations. The offer hung in the air between them. Not charity disguised as opportunity, but a genuine business proposition based on demonstrated value. Abigail considered it carefully, as she would any significant decision. And if I wanted to rebuild elsewhere, start fresh, she asked, testing the boundaries of her new freedom. Then we'd help you do that, Logan replied without hesitation. The offer isn't conditional on your acceptance. The proceeds from selling your land to developers would provide ample funds for a new home wherever you chose. Abigail appreciated the honesty, the absence of pressure or persuasion in his approach. This wasn't about fulfilling an obligation to James or Hank's memory anymore. It had evolved into something more straightforward, a mutual recognition of benefit. I've actually been thinking about what comes next, she admitted. Not just for me, but for this property that's become so entwined with my husband's legacy. From her stack of papers, she withdrew a sketch she'd been working on, a floor plan for a modestly sized house situated near where her cabin had stood. I was considering rebuilding, not to live there year-round, but as a summer place, somewhere, to tend a garden and maintain connection to the land James and I shared. She paused, then added, though perhaps that's impractical now. Logan studied the sketch with interest. Not necessarily impractical. The land itself is still good, views still beautiful. It's just the existing structure that's compromised. He handed back the drawing. You could rebuild on higher ground, away from the drainage issues that weakened the original foundation. And split my time, Abigail continued, thinking aloud. Winters here at Broken Spur where it's safer, working as your financial manager. Summers at the new cabin, communing with the past while still moving forward. The compromise appealed to her practical nature, honoring history without being imprisoned by it. Sounds like a reasonable plan, Logan agreed. Best of both worlds, as they discussed logistics, construction timelines, potential builders, designs that would honor the original cabin's character while incorporating modern efficiencies. Abigail felt a sense of possibility that had been absent from her life for years, not just surviving until spring, but building towards summers and falls and winters to come, each with purpose and connection. The following weeks brought rapid change as winter reluctantly released its grip on the Wyoming landscape. Abigail formally accepted the position as Broken Spur's financial manager, signing papers that Logan had prepared with his attorney. The salary was generous, the responsibilities clearly outlined, her autonomy respected. With that foundation secure, she turned her attention to her property. The remains of the original cabin were respectfully demolished, salvageable materials carefully preserved for potential incorporation into the new structure. Abigail and Logan visited the site together, selecting an elevated location with natural drainage and protection from the prevailing winds, practical considerations that James would have appreciated. The architect they engaged worked closely with Abigail to design a cabin that echoed the original's character while incorporating modern efficiencies, better insulation, solar panels, a backup generator system, and accessibility features that acknowledged her advancing years without emphasizing them. As April arrived, bringing the frenetic energy of calving season to Broken Spur, Abigail found herself at the center of ranch operations in unexpected ways. Her financial expertise complemented Logan's practical knowledge, creating a management approach that blended tradition with innovation. Ranch hands came to respect her sharp mind and no-nonsense manner, often seeking her input on matters extending beyond pure finances into general operations. Ground was broken for the new cabin in early May. A modest ceremony attended by Logan, Maggie, and several ranch hands who had volunteered to help with construction during their off hours. Abigail placed a small metal box in the foundation before concrete was poured, containing one of James's letters, a photograph of their original home, and a handwritten note explaining the rancher's promise that had ultimately led to this moment of renewal. By midsummer, the new cabin's framework stood proudly against the sky, windows positioned to capture the same mountain views that had graced the original structure. Abigail visited weekly to monitor progress, increasingly excited about the possibility of spending late summer nights on the wide porch being built to her specifications. At Broken Spur, her role continued to evolve. The summer interns she'd recruited brought fresh energy and ideas, which Abigail helped refine with her practical experience. She found unexpected joy in mentoring these young people, sharing wisdom accumulated through decades of rural Wyoming life, teaching them that financial management in agriculture required understanding the land as much as the numbers. Logan observed this mentorship with evident approval. "You've got a gift for teaching," he commented one evening as they reviewed quarterly projections on the main house porch. "These kids are learning more from you than they would in any classroom." "Experience has value," Abigail acknowledged, "though sometimes I wonder if I learned its most important lessons too late." "Never too late," Logan countered. "Look at everything that's happened since winter. The ranch operating more efficiently than ever, your new cabin taking shape, community connections strengthened." He was right, of course. The transformation of her circumstances over the past 7 months was remarkable, not just in practical terms, but in her internal landscape as well. The stubborn pride that had nearly been her undoing had softened into something more nuanced, self-respect balanced with openness to interdependence, independence tempered with recognition of community's essential role. By early September, the new cabin was sufficiently complete for Abigail to spend her first night there. The structure was beautiful, echoing the simplicity of the original while incorporating thoughtful improvements. James's rocking chair, salvaged from the collapsed building, held place of honor on the porch. Inside, photographs and mementos created continuity between past and present. That evening, Logan drove her out to the property, helping carry supplies and ensuring everything was functioning properly before preparing to leave her to enjoy this space alone. "You're sure you'll be all right out here?" he asked, characteristic concern in his voice. "Cell reception is better than before with the new tower, but still spotty." "I'll be fine," Abigail assured him, gesturing to the modern amenities that made this cabin so different from her previous one. Generator, satellite phone, enough food for a week. Besides, it's just for 2 nights. I'll be back at Broken Spur for Thursday's financial meeting." Logan nodded, accepting her capability while maintaining watchful care, the balance they'd achieved over months of working together. "Enjoy your homecoming, then." After he departed, Abigail sat on her new porch as twilight descended over the familiar landscape. The mountains turned purple against the fading light. Crickets began their evening chorus, and stars emerged in the darkening sky, the same eternal patterns that had backlit her life with James. She felt his presence not as a ghost haunting these new walls, but as an approving witness to her evolution. James had understood the value of community long before she rediscovered it through winter hardship. He would appreciate how she had found a way to honor their shared past while embracing the new possibilities. As full darkness settled over the Wyoming countryside, Abigail lit the lamps in her new home. The soft glow illuminated not just the physical space, but the journey that had brought her here. From isolation and stubborn self-reliance through crisis and revelation to this moment of integrated purpose. The winter that had nearly claimed her through starvation and cold had instead delivered her to a fuller life than she had allowed herself to imagine possible. The cowboy who had appeared at her door with supplies had offered more than material survival. He had extended the legacy of connection that James and Hank Mitchell had established decades earlier, reminding her that independence and community were not opposing forces, but complementary strengths. Abigail Turner had not abandoned her past or surrendered her self-determination. Rather, she had expanded her understanding of what it meant to honor both. The widow, who had been starving in winter, had found not just food and warmth, but renewal. A second chapter, written not in opposition to the first, but as its thoughtful, hopeful continuation. Tomorrow she would wake in this new home, built on the foundation of the old, tend the small garden already establishing itself in the rich Wyoming soil, and perhaps begin the quilt she'd been designing to capture this year's journey from isolation to connection. In a few days, she would return to Broken Spur, to financial ledgers and ranch operations, and meals shared with people who had become a kind of family. And when winter returned, as it inevitably would in this demanding landscape, Abigail would face it not with fear, but preparedness, not alone, but surrounded by community, carrying forward the true legacy James had left her, not walls and windows, but the wisdom to recognize that authentic strength often manifests in the connections we nurture rather than the burdens we insist on bearing alone. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.